May the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our strength and Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Fear no one. Do not fear, do not be afraid. 3 times in today's Gospel, Jesus says, in one way or another, not to fear or be afraid. Now, if we took a quick poll of the room, we would come up with some fairly standard answers for what we're afraid of, and no doubt some fairly unusual and interesting answers for what we're afraid of. There'd be a whole heap of people, some younger ones I know, who are afraid of creepy crawlies, spiders, snakes, cockroaches even. Dad, there's a cockroach in my room. A lot of people fear falling. You know, it's a very common fear, as is loneliness, the fear of death or injury, the fear of public speaking. Believe it or not, I was absolutely, completely and utterly terrified of public speaking until well into my 20s. And the thing that helped me overcome it, it was a switch that was like, it flicked it and you can't stop me now, was reading the scriptures in church. Started going to church in 2003, and within a couple of months the vicar said, we've got no one to read, would you get up and read today? And I went, no. And he said, yes. And I went, no. And he said, yeah, I've said the same thing to some of you, and you say no, and I say yes. And I did, and I'm still here, living to tell the tale. We have personal and local fears, and we also have existential fears. Yesterday at Synod, one motion sought to suggest that the Anglican communion was in peril of breaking apart. And there was an almost palpable fear of losing the unity of the church, of losing the church altogether. And some of the other motions were born out of that fear. They were driven by fear. They were not driven by unity. Gladly, some sensible heads reigned in Synod, and some of those fears were overcome. I got home from Synod. You don't really pay attention to the world around you when you're in a room with 300 people for, 9 hours? A lot of talking heads. And now I discovered there was nearly a coup in Russia, of all places. And the fears that were immediately on social media were the fears of the possibility of nuclear war. How could a superpower or a former superpower like Russia, what would they do with their weapons? I fear lack of compassion in society. I talked about compassion last week. While the world this week was watching and lamenting the fate of 5 people in a submarine whose life ended down by the Titanic, it was almost wall-to-wall media coverage all week, Refugee Week. 750 or so refugees got on a boat in Lebanon. Many of them had fled war, persecution, social and economic injustice. And that boat capsized on its way to Greece. The Greek government did not send help when they were warned that that boat would probably capsize. It's estimated 500 people died, possibly more, 100 of which were children in the hold of the boat, and scarcely made the news. It was one of those 30-second grabs right before it goes to sport. You know, oh, this happened. Oh, what? The Knights going to win this week. No. Can you see the juxtaposition of 2 whole minutes on 5 white privileged people? Sorry to call this out, but someone else called it out in Synod, the bishop. We live in a privileged society. We live in a safe, society, and we do not have to think about the plight and genuine fear of our brothers and sisters who are refugees, our brothers and sisters who live in war-torn Ukraine, our brothers and sisters who live in Russia and through no fault of their own have someone above them who makes bad decisions. So we have local personal fears, we have existential fears. But is that the fears Jesus is talking about in today's gospel? He may well be. That might be all-encompassing. But I think there's another fear that runs through the first reading, the psalm, the gospel. It's the fear of what others say and about you and then do to you. It's the fear of what other people think of you. And it's a real fear. It starts in school. You know, how we dress, what music we like. Are we hanging out with the right crowd? Will I be perceived to be uncool or not liked if I'm hanging out with the wrong kids at school? And it never leaves. When Jesus says, "Fear no one, do not fear those who kill the body," you know, those who will violently persecute you, he's being specific. We talked about this in Bible study. You have to read all of Matthew 10 to get this. Because in the preceding verses he says, "I am sending you out, the disciples, like sheep amidst the wolves. So be as wise as serpents and innocent as doves." Won't spend any time on that because that's such a wonderful thing. But beware of them, for they will hand you over to councils and flog you in their synagogues, and you'll be dragged before governors and kings because of me, as a testimony to them and the Gentiles. When they hand you over, do not worry about how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you at that time. It is not you who speak, but the Spirit of the Father who is speaking through you. And then just a few verses later, fear no one. Here's the thing. Jesus is forming his disciples and us as disciples to do one thing: pattern our lives after him, to live and love as he lived and loved, to be shaped and defined by him in everything we say and do. And if we fear what others say about us or to us, or what they might do to us, we will not be able to proclaim the gospel in the light of day and from the rooftops full of joy and hope. Synod is a wonderful little petri dish of that, exactly that, because someone will get up and say something that might be offensive or obnoxious, and some of us will just sit there and go, if I get up, what are they going to say about me? Will I say the wrong thing? Will they then attack me? And one Synod rep said, from what she said 4 years ago, she's still persecuted. Others, like our wonderful Dean Catherine, the brilliant Bishop Charlie of this congregation, get up and speak without fear. They pattern their lives after Christ, and it is so obvious to see. Look at the first reading, Jeremiah. You know, Jeremiah, the prophet who spoke truth to power, who fearlessly told the people of Israel and its leaders, no, you're on the wrong path. You've got to turn back to God. We've got to get this right. And he is articulating exactly what's happening. The mob is there causing terror, and they're wanting to blame him, and they're looking for his downfall. And then even his friends. You know, we think we've got great friends, and then when the trouble comes, use the right phrase here, not the colloquial one, are they going to stand by you? Or are they going to fear copying what you're copying for standing by you? So he's right. He's absolutely summed up the nature of human society well. Is we'll drag down tall poppies and we'll go at people as a group. Mobs form and you know. Now, Jeremiah imagines that God is Yahweh is this dread warrior who will defend him and then shame his adversaries. And it's a nice thought to think that God's always on my side, God's got my back, and that God will shame those who are against me. But I reckon my enemies think that of me too. Those who think differently from me might think that. So I wonder if Jeremiah hasn't quite got it right. That actually Jesus speaks into Jeremiah's experience and the experience of the psalmist in Psalm 69, the insults of those who insult you have fallen on me. I wonder if Jesus speaks into that and says, if you pattern your life after me, the forgiving one, the loving one, if you do not fear the mob, they can't define you. You will not live your life defined by them. Live your life defined by me, by who I am and how I loved and how I've forgiven. And even more so after his death and resurrection, when he comes back and says, peace be with you. You are forgiven. If you're convinced God's love is the preeminent creative life force in all the universe, if you believe the good news of Jesus Christ is ultimately the good news of life being victorious over death, of love over fear, of unity over division, truth over lies, light over darkness, then imitating Jesus means not fearing the death of the body. It means we get our value from God. And that is what will fill our souls. Getting our value from God. Being oriented to God the Father through Jesus Christ. It's the commitment at baptism. We had a most glorious baptism last Sunday. And the question is, do you turn to Christ? I turn to Christ. What does that mean? I constantly orient my life through Christ. I see the world through the lens of Christ. So when I'm striving to live as a disciple of Christ, I'm giving myself the best chance to. Our souls are filled and grace abounds, St. Paul says. When we're not governed by others, when we're not governed by sin, grace abounds. Fear no one, do not fear and do not be afraid. Do not be afraid of what others think. You are of so much value to God by being aligned with him. Fill your soul with the good news that is God's love for you, and that is so abundant and so all-encompassing that every hair on your head is counted, every prayer is heard, and every beat of your heart filled with God's peace. And then, having your soul filled up, shout about this love from the rooftops. The Lord be with you.